Wasn't really excited about the car yesterday afternoon, the last practice, but the car, it come around. I think it's going to be okay. We've got a good engine in it, but going to see something you probably hadn't ever seen on Fox.
Your nickname is Ironhead.
Well, that's Bobby Allison's nickname for me.
This fire suit right here has to be the one that he was burned in the Corvette crash in 2004.
Friday, February 18th, 2001. On the last lap of the Daytona 500, this was the day that the Intimidator, Dale Earnhardt Sr., made his passing known. The suddenness of his death shocked NASCAR and the American public. His demise was too abrupt for someone who had demonstrated such resiliency. People continued to ignore his private garage even after it had been there for a while. There was a vault full of untold stories there, hidden and unknown. When they finally got around to opening it, they were shocked to see what had been in Dale Earnhardt's garage after he died. Then let's get into the meat of the matter. A lengthy and distinguished career in NASCAR, drove by Dale Earnhardt Sr., established him as a legendary figure in the sport. He won 76 races in the Winston Cup Series between his 1979 triumph at Bristol's Southeastern 500 and his 2000 victory at Talladega. It wasn't only the victories, though, it was his style of victory that set him apart. Fearless drafting, heavy banging, and an overwhelming sense of psychological superiority were all parts of his aggressive racing style. He tied Richard Petty for the record at the time with 7 Winston Cup victories, which he earned in 1980, 1986, 1987, 1990, 1991, 1993, and 94. A subsequent attempt by Jimmy Johnson equaled this record, but it was never surpassed. Although Earnhardt won the Twin 125s a record 12 times and the Busch Clash 6 times, he failed to win the Daytona 500 until 1998. His emotional triumph ended a 20-year drought and was hailed even by opposing pit crews. But his impact extended much beyond statistics. With an ethos that mirrored the hardships and principles of common Americans, Earnhardt sprinted for more than just trophies. He was the prototypical blue-collar hero. Dale Earnhardt was born in 1951 to Ralph, a well-respected but financially strapped short-track racer. He left school in the 9th grade and took on various jobs to help fund his early racing endeavors. Fans from the countryside and the working class found him particularly endearing because of his humble beginnings, his Southern heritage, and his no-nonsense attitude. A man who went his own way without looking for validation, he raced with determination and without remorse. His distinctive mustache and black shades concealed a scowl on many occasions, and the sight of his No. 3 black Chevrolet inspired equal parts dread and reverence. Earnhardt's portrayal of the Intimidator was both meticulously staged and utterly genuine. Both his opponents and spectators respected him for his fearless approach to the ring, where he did not hesitate to initiate contact. Some saw him as an anti-hero, while others saw him as a demigod. He was forthright, occasionally violent, but always genuine. His competence was admired even by those who disapproved of his ways. Even when he was off the track, his genuine demeanor was evident. In addition to keeping strong links to his birthplace, he was well known for making time for fans, going on fishing and hunting excursions with pals, and more. He did not use publicists or handlers to improve his image, unlike many other famous athletes of his day. What remained unsaid and unseen, even to his closest associates, is probably the most intriguing aspect of Earnhardt's legacy. His untimely demise on the last lap of the 2001 Daytona 500 shocked many in the NASCAR community and beyond, who were grieving the loss of a star athlete who had quietly amassed an empire away from the limelight. Dale Earnhardt Jr. is just one of several talented drivers whose careers have been catapulted by his Mooresville, North Carolina-based racing business, Dale Earnhardt Incorporated, DEI. Even after he passed away, his legacy lived on via changes to player safety measures. After Earnhardt's death from a basal skull fracture, NASCAR finally started to implement additional safety measures. Following the disaster, NASCAR made several changes to its emergency response processes, including making the HANS device mandatory, implementing safer barriers on tracks, redesigning vehicle chassis to be more impact-resistant, and more. Thus, his untimely demise sparked improvements that have safeguarded innumerable motorists ever since. The enduring appeal of his image, together with tributes and documentaries, has ensured his existence over the years. After more than a decade off of the Cup Series, Richard Childress Racing brought the number 3 car back in 2014 with Austin Dillon at the wheel. Childress was Childress's grandson. Dale Earnhardt Jr. continued the family name into the new millennium and became a fan favorite while never attempting to imitate his famous dad. Dale Earnhardt Sr. is still well known and respected in the United States, and not only in the racing community. Garage walls in rural southern towns still bear murals of his visage. A lot of people share his statements on social media. We still see the black number 3 on caps, t-shirts, and window decals. The tragic and triumphant tale of his life has made him a legend in his own right, surpassing that of any other athlete. However, this is not all of his story. The world lost a racing star in 2001 with the death of Dale Earnhardt Sr., but his loved ones were left with something subtly powerful: a North Carolina private garage that few had ever seen in its entirety. In his private life, Earnhardt kept a low profile, despite his longtime reputation as the Intimidator, due to his intimidating personality and violent driving style. Members of the family and close associates who had visited the garage after his death did so with a blend of respect and quiet intrigue. They stumbled across a private museum of memories, not only a repository for automobile artifacts. The unassuming garage was close to his Mooresville, North Carolina home. It was well organized and served its purpose. This wasn't an exhibition. There were no velvet ropes or neon lights to detract from the artifacts. It felt personal, encircled by jackets, worn newspaper clippings, handwritten comments, and framed photographs, many of which had never been published, sat meticulously kept race vehicles, helmets, and trophies, wheel to wheel. It seemed as if every object had a story to tell, not simply a moment. Surrounded by tools, tires, grease, and grime, it felt less like a warehouse tour and more like entering a silent autobiography. I left behind everything there wasn't only a statement about the tangible things Earnhardt had left behind, it was a statement about everything. The things he kept were a coded emotional gesture, a final communication. The centerpiece of this potent setting was a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, the prized possession of his private collection. It was obvious that this Chevy had been kept rather than repaired, in contrast to the immaculate examples shown at auto exhibitions. The sofa had its original upholstery. Fading labels and fingerprints adorned the engine compartment. The chrome accents on the dashboard had developed a patina that can only be achieved over many years of use. Earnhardt considered this an artifact of his past. The automobile brought back fond memories of his boyhood in Kannapolis, where he would observe and learn from his father, Ralph Earnhardt, as he worked on vehicles in the yard. The 1957 Chevy wasn't only the focal point of the garage, it served as a temple. Encircling it were photographs of young Dale, posing on toolboxes, resting against his father's vehicles, and smiling through hands coated with grease. This was obviously the starting point of the tale, given its setting. Everything else in the garage was a living history of his racing career. On display were a number of authentic NASCAR race vehicles, each meticulously preserved in the state it had been in following its most recent race. The genuine deal, these vehicles still showed the dirt, dings, and wear and tear from their last laps in the race. Proudly leaning against a wall, the paint of the matte black number 3 Goodwrench Chevrolet Monte Carlo, possibly the most iconic car in NASCAR history, absorbed the dappled light. The blue and yellow Wrangler-sponsored Chevy he raced during his 1980s ascent to fame and other cars from his illustrious collaboration with Richard Childress's championship days were nearby. It was unusual to see these aged vehicles in such good condition. Teams typically sell or reuse racing vehicles rather than keeping them for the drivers, evidently realizing that each machine represented a milestone that statistics alone could never completely respect. Earnhardt had clung onto these particular machines. The collection of memorabilia in Earnhardt's garage revealed a side of him that not even his closest associates could fully appreciate while he was alive. A guy who valued his legacy more than his own ego. The garage of Dale Earnhardt Sr. was not an exhibition space. Guests were not greeted with any informational plaques, velvet ropes, or glossy displays. The layout, on the other hand, suggested that Earnhardt was trying to convey something via the use of things rather than words. Everything was back where it had been before: the car, the helmet, the jacket, and the message. The automobiles were pivotal, and none more so than the number 3 Goodwrench Chevrolet Monte Carlo, a legendary ride that had become an emblem of dread and greatness in the 90s. The garage included many restored examples of this vehicle, each dating back to a different year and sporting the telltale signs of its previous adventures: dings in the paint, rubbing against the tires, and filth adhering to the fenders. You wouldn't call them showroom restorations. Earnhardt climbed out of them, and they were left just as he found them. The shattered rear panel from one Monte Carlo's 1996 Winston 500 Triumph lingered on, as did his incredible comeback from 18th position with a few laps to go, which resulted in one of his most amazing triumphs at Talladega. His favorite short track, Bristol Motor Speedway, which he won 9 times throughout his career, was somewhat visible on another. There was a throwback to the days when the sleek black number 3 became famous in the garage, with the Wrangler-sponsored Pontiac Grand Prix from the mid-1980s. This blue and yellow ride belonged to Earnhardt's Richard Childress racing days, when he was still building his image as a relentless racer during the Wrangler years. Despite the Wrangler car's relative obscurity compared to the Goodwrench entries that followed, it served as a crucial stepping stone to his early career, particularly his championship seasons of 1986 and 1987. These years marked the beginning of his famed driver-owner association with Childress. Vehicles used on racing days weren't the only ones maintained. Includes Earnhardt's rust-colored bare-bones Oldsmobile, his first Busch Series vehicle. Although it lacked fame and speed, it stood for perseverance and selflessness. He confided in a friend that he had to pray over before every race in this particular vehicle, as he knew that any accident may spell the end of his career due to concerns about safety and the financial devastation it could create. In the late 1970s, when he was known just as Ralph's boy trying to make it, he began competing at Concord Speedway and Metrolina Fairgrounds with vehicles similar to these. The helmets were stashed in a corner of the garage, roughly organized by year. Fire suits marked with perspiration accompanied the first open-face variants, which had scratched visors. This man began racing with these instruments when safety equipment was scarce and expectations were high. His subsequent helmets, which had more sophisticated cushioning and stylistic paint jobs, reflected the increasing professionalism of NASCAR and his rising status within it. Someone has written, "Ran it hot, won it anyway," in silver Sharpie on one chipped visor of the 1990 Coca-Cola 600. Mixed in among the helmets were other seemingly little personal belongings, but which really had profound meaning. A worn leather duffel bag with faded race travel cards from Atlanta, Michigan, and Richmond. a paper note that said "spare suit" that was scotch-taped to an extra fire suit. All of the products had the same air of arid realism, so use them only in an emergency. This man was totally devoted to his work. He wasn't just getting ready for guests. At the rear of the garage, on a dusty shelf, was a collection of medals, some shiny and others weathered. The recognizable winged form of the vintage 1998 Harley J. Earl Daytona 500 trophy was present. Some of the lesser, less significant prizes included a 1975 plaque from Hickory Motor Speedway, a ceramic mug from a dirt track invitational, and a thank you plate from a local school fundraiser where he had contributed an autographed tire. The statistics kept by NASCAR do not include these obscure awards, yet they conveyed a story all their own. They had a conversation with a man who, despite his success, never forgot his roots. And then, there were the unexpected pieces. His hunting rifle displayed on the wall next to a signed picture of Johnny Rutherford, a camouflage cap stitched by a fan in 1996 with the word DEI, a pair of antlers wrapped in duct tape and marked Talladega 1990, post-race gift from Junior. These quirky personal artifacts showed Earnhardt's sense of humor, his friendships, and his unwavering devotion to his heritage and supporters. The now famous 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air is an essential part of every tale involving the memorabilia. The condition was not pristine. When you leaned in, the chairs creaked and the paint had worn down. This automobile, however, was unique. Fragmented images of a young Dale Earnhardt and his father, Ralph, around it as it stood in the center of the garage. A tale of chrome and steel, the Chevy was an American icon. Dale had seen his father work on similar cars in Kannapolis when he was a kid. There was no need for it to win races, since it had already achieved a larger victory. It kept the memory of the beginning alive. Dale Earnhardt didn't collect mementos of fame or power, despite his zeal. The pieces belonged to a life that was full of purpose and speed. From a dented visor to a crumpled trophy, every object belonged to a life narrative conveyed through quiet, grease, dirt, and metal. A temple to triumph did not exist in the garage. Thinking about who he competed for and why he raced was the point. The Richard Childress Racing Museum in Welcome, North Carolina, or the DEI site in Mooresville now house many of these objects. Some things stay hidden, kept the way they were, since no one can put a price on them. No, that's not all. Original racing cars, championship trophies, and melancholy tributes to Earnhardt's memory and legacy dominated much of the garage area, but there were also surprising, quirky relics here and there that added complexity and richness to the overall image. Not exactly what one would anticipate in a place rich in motorsport history, but a forklift parked near the garage's back was one of the first peculiarities that caught the eye of guests. However, this forklift was unlike any other. It had Winston Cup decals all over it, a little number 3 sticker on the side, and duct tape residue across the handles. Employees who had worked for Earnhardt in the past said that he liked to help out with the shop's heavy lifting using this forklift. Even when he wasn't racing, he insisted on taking the wheel and would make jokes about it being his real number 3 ride. The forklift has become a symbol of Earnhardt's playful working-man humor, covered in fading sponsor insignia, but obviously still serving its purpose. Close by stood a big, weathered Wrangler billboard, a relic from the early 1980s when Earnhardt's number 3 vehicle was adorned in the denim brand's signature yellow and blue colors. Before Earnhardt saved it, the sign, which had been utilized in advertising campaigns all across the South, had obviously spent years in the elements. Rust twisted over the frame, paint cracked, and corners were ragged. Still, it had been kept, purposefully leaning against the distant wall, not for show, but as an emotional artifact. During the early stages of his NASCAR career, When Wrangler was a key sponsor, and the sport lacked the refined commercialism that would come to characterize it, this billboard symbolized the first significant chapter of his career. Afterwards, there were the unexplained components that were difficult to classify. In one corner was a working soda machine from the 1990s. It had never been used before, but was filled with antique cans of Mountain Dew and Coca-Cola with the NASCAR emblem. These devices were commonplace in the South's garages and pit lanes at one point, and Earnhardt held onto his. Across the room, on little wooden pedestals, like an alternative kind of trophy, were a pair of worn-out, dusty cowboy boots. The boots looked like they had been used for a long time. Neither the plaques nor the objects themselves were marked. However, their elevated and peculiarly respectful positioning hinted to a more intimate significance. A worn leather chair, clearly worn from more than a few decades and a few fights, sat in the seating area next to the back door. The middle of the seat had worn down, and the armrests had become stained from years of use. It was placed next to a little wooden side table that had an ashtray with the number 3 emblem, an old racing magazine stack, and a TV remote control that was covered in electrical tape and in poor condition. Nobody even tried to clean this up. If Earnhardt wanted to watch a repeat of a race or a western, he could have stepped in at any second and slumped back into that chair. It was a lived-in nook, clearly inhabited by humans, flawed, imperfect, and completely uncurated. These items gave Earnhardt's garage some depth, even if they didn't have the significance of championships or memorable victories. In the midst of all the machinery and praise, they provided moments of humor, friendliness, and character. Above all else, they stressed that the intention of this location was never to host an exhibition. There were inside jokes, stories, and mementos of a life impacted by more than just engine noise and trophy cases. It was a sanctuary. The Winston Cup forklift and the old boots were two of Earnhardt's eccentric possessions that demonstrated his refusal to abandon his roots. Being no-nonsense, dryly humorous, and firmly rooted in his working-class background allowed him to maintain his groundedness. Sure, he reveled in his accomplishments, but he also paid tribute to the insignificant, the funny, and the emotional moments. What, therefore, become of this whole mess? What happened to Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s collection? Much of the racing world froze in shock and grief after Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s 2001 death in the Daytona 500. His loved ones and those closest to him made a deliberate decision in the months and years that followed, not to sterilize his memory, but to hold on to the places and things that revealed the complex character of the man in the helmet. Part of this endeavor revolved around the decision to make Earnhardt's original Mooresville, North Carolina garage and workshop complex available to the public. The Richard Childress Racing Museum in Welcome, the Dale Earnhardt Tribute Center in Kannapolis, and the DEI complex in Mooresville are a sum of the carefully selected locations that have acquired pieces from that private world throughout the years. When it was opened to the public in 1999, the facility's expansive showroom and retail area had a treasure trove of photographs, awards, racing suits, and other artifacts documenting the careers of Dale Earnhardt Sr., Jr., and other racers from DEI. A tribute to a life lived quickly and courageously, the 8,700-square-foot rotunda would house Earnhardt's Winston Cup trophies, Junior's laurels, and instruments of the trade. The Garage Mahal became a beloved moniker for the structure. But the part of DEI that deals with the public started to disappear over time. In the days leading up to the COVID-19 epidemic, the showroom was only open for a few hours each day. Shops selling primarily uncommercialized items were noted by visitors at the time as resembling a nostalgic time capsule. However, access was denied to all individuals following the start of the epidemic. Behind locked doors and dimmed lights, the once vibrant venue that once brought Earnhardt's fans near to his soul is now deserted. Members of the public are still not allowed access to the site, even though it is being used for technical and private projects. Visitors to Welcome, North Carolina, may get a closer look at Earnhardt's legacy at the Richard Childress Racing Museum, which has an extensive collection of his race vehicles and other memorabilia. Almost 50,000 square feet make up the museum, which was opened to the public in 2003 at the location of the original RCR store. One of Earnhardt's team haulers, autographed by fans following his 2001 demise, is also on display at the RCR Museum. Many guests have commented about the profound impact of being in the presence of such genuine machinery and thoughtful touches. Though the exhibits are well organized and have inscriptions that detail the history of each vehicle, race, and image, it is the energy, the feeling that Earnhardt's spirit remains in the spaces he previously traversed, that makes a lasting impression. There are a number of local and regional initiatives that pay tribute to him, while the RCR Museum is the largest and most official. In Kannapolis, North Carolina, where he was born and raised, there are permanent and traveling exhibits that pay homage to Earnhardt's life and work. His personal belongings and dirt track medals from his boyhood are on display at the Monroe Paul Center and other local racing museums, which help to illustrate his modest origins. Rather than portraying Dale as the Intimidator, these community-focused exhibits show an intimate side of the man, reminding guests that he was once a dreamer from Kannapolis. The Curb Museum of Music and Motorsports is another location that from time to time showcases Earnhardt relics. The museum isn't devoted entirely to him, but it does have rotating NASCAR displays that occasionally include memorabilia from his career. These exhibits highlight his ties to the South's musical and cultural heritage as well as his involvement in racing. Fans frequently come across relics in these smaller, more personal settings that evoke strong recollections of witnessing him race. But not every piece of Earnhardt's memorabilia has ended up in a museum or library. Cars and fire suits in particular have found their way into private collections. Although he was able to retain over 40 of Earnhardt's original vehicles, not everything could be, according to his longtime team owner and close friend, Richard Childress. Unfortunately for his admirers and children, some of his possessions ended up at auction blocks. Dale Earnhardt's daughter, Kelly, has gone public with her displeasure with the current system for accessing family heirlooms, pointing out that Teresa Earnhardt and the DEI estate still own a lot of the stuff. There seems to be a more intricate web of legacy management and familial dynamics at work here, as rumors have it that not even Dale Jr. could collect his own race outfits from the DEI. It has been said that there are chambers within the DEI complex that supposedly still include race suits, photos, and notes made by Dale Sr., which have been kept undisturbed since his death. Fans and former workers feel that these relics are more than just memorabilia. They are pieces of history that should be redistributed to the public. Despite the fact that the area is private and access is restricted, they nevertheless have a special place in their hearts. Taylor Earnhardt is the daughter of Dale Sr. and Teresa. One can only hope that she will inherit the inheritance and decide to share more of it with fans when the time comes. Until then, a lot of DEI's remaining content is out of reach. Dale Earnhardt's legacy is just as powerful as ever. Despite all the setbacks and challenges, people from all across the nation continue to visit the RCR Museum, and many have said that their experiences there have been profound, even mystical. Some go to Kannapolis, while others follow in his footsteps, trying to piece together a tale that no museum can do justice. These settings have an effect that goes beyond mere nostalgia. They show how much Earnhardt valued leaving an emotional mark on his loved ones, teammates, and fans, as much as he valued winning championships and collecting trophies. Anything from the immaculate black number 3 at RCR to the meticulously kept shop spaces at DEI to a fading snapshot hidden away in a Kannapolis museum is an artifact with a function. It brings Dale Earnhardt's legacy and the values he represented to the forefront. The emotional depth of his life is enhanced by even the less talked-about parts of his legacy, such as the hauler that admirers signed in grief or the contested objects that were kept hidden from the public eye. Tension, memory, and the human will to cling to what's important are all mentioned, implying that legacy is about more than just preservation. The value of these objects will only increase with the passage of time. Some of Dale Earnhardt's memorabilia is in secure locations, while other pieces have fallen into disrepair due to private ownership or the passage of time. However, it is all burdened by the weight of a man who sacrificed his identity, his family, and his sport. Seeing Earnhardt's world maintained in this fashion evokes a level of personal loss and contemplation that very few sports museums are able to accomplish, especially for lifelong fans. More than that, it is a temple to greatness. An intense, humorous, and modest existence is shown in this brutally honest depiction. Many visitors find the experience moving and humbling, remarking on how the imperfections, like dents on a car, rust on a toolbox, or a letter written in permanent marker, say more than a documentary ever could. Not focusing on the victories alone is one of the most talked-about aspects. The collection includes worn-out auto components from races that were not won, unframed fan letters that were never framed or embellished, and even a shattered rear-view mirror that Earnhardt insisted on retaining following a challenging 1997 race at Martinsville. He had written a little note to himself and put it up there. Still worth it. More valuable than racing statistics or championship rings is the legacy that has been built via the preservation of Earnhardt's garage and its satellite displays around North Carolina. Despite his notoriety and fierceness on the track, Dale Earnhardt's narrative is best recounted via tattered boots, twisted metal, and scrawled notes than by shiny plaques. So, that's it for now. I appreciate you tuning in. How was this video for you? To make sure you don't miss any of our future uploads, we would really appreciate it if you could like, comment, and subscribe if you did. This movie you're viewing right now is really mind-blowing, so you definitely shouldn't miss it.